Hi there. So we're going to cover our cake in fondant. I'm kneading my fondant right now, but it wasn't this pliable to begin with. Usually commercial fondant is usually hard when you get it out of the bucket. So I stuck some in the microwave and microwaved it for a few minutes to make it a little bit more pliable for me to work with. So this makes it a whole lot easier to work with. You knead until it looks nice and smooth. So for this particular design, I need my fondant to be firm on the cake because I want it to really stand nice and straight. So to help me achieve that, I am going to be adding CMC or Tylose powder to the fondant to harden it. And so that way it's easier to handle and easier for me to place on the cake because of the design of this cake. So I have here some CMC. CMC is just cellulose powder. It's carboxymethyl cellulose powder. It adds strength to your fondant. This works just the same way as Tylose does. So I'm going to divide this in sections and add CMC to it so I can get a very firm fondant for my design. I have no particular recipe on how much Tylose or CMC I add to my fondant. I just add it until I feel the fondant is hard enough. I'm going to massage the CMC into the fondant. So my fondant is sticking to my table. So I like to use shortening when I roll out my fondant. Because flour, some people will use sugar or flour. I find that flour will make it dry out faster, and I find sugar will make it too sweet. So I stick to shortening, which keeps it pliable and easy to knead and prevents it from sticking. It is a whole workout working with fondant. So how do you determine how wide of a fondant panel you will need to cover your cake? You could do it two ways. You could use a measuring tape to measure out the diameter of the cake to figure out how wide you need to roll out your fondant. Or you could just do the math on your calculator by using the formula 2 multiplied by pi multiplied by the radius. So the value of pi is in your calculator. You don't have to remember it. So you just need to know what your radius is. And so if you're working with a 10-inch cake, then your radius is half of that, which is 5. So I'm working with a 8.5-inch cake and a 5.5-inch cake. The radius of my 5.5-inch cake is 2.75. So I'm going to multiply that by 2, and I will then multiply that by pi, and that will give me 17.2 inches of fondant that I need to roll out in length. And for my bottom tier, which is an 8.5-inch cake, my radius is 4.25. I'm going to multiply that by 2 and multiply that by pi, and that will give me 26.7 inches, so 27 inches of fondant. So that is how I do the math. I prefer to do the math on my calculator. It's pretty fast rather than measuring with a measuring tape. Whatever method works for you, stick with it and master it. So I'm rolling out the fondant panel I'm going to need for my top tier. I have measured the length of my top tier and I know I need 12 inches in height of fondant. I'm going to roll out 17 inches in length. I'm trying to mold it to keep it nice and in a rectangle as I roll. So I have enough for my length and just almost, I need to roll it out just a tad lot wider for my height. And I'm going to search for air bubbles. Pop in any air bubbles. And I'm going to smooth it out with a fondant smoother. I am not going to use shortening to smooth this out. I'm going to use cornstarch instead. This is going to be the bottom of my fondant. So I'm going to try to shape it straight. I have cut out the fondant in preparation for me placing it on my cake, but I'm going to let it sit out for a little bit to get nice and firm. So to help the process, instead of letting it sit at room temperature, I'm going to place it in the fridge and let it rest in the fridge to allow the CMC make the fondant hard. We're going to repeat the same process for the bottom tier. Alright, so our fondant is nice and firm, so I'm going to attach it to our cake. I'm attaching the fondant to the cake with shortening. So I attach the fondant with shortening. That's what I'm rubbing right on it right now. This is a big piece we're working with. Alright, there. love how it's coming out. I think it's exactly what I envisioned. I'm going to attach my flowers now. I'm using sugar and I'm using a flour peak to adhere the flowers to my cake. Here's a little trick I learned with fondant cakes. Have you ever had a fondant cake as it came to room temperatures that it having air bubbles form underneath it, and sometimes you have a blowout, it becomes so large that there's nowhere for the air to go. So this is a trick I learned very early while working with fondant cakes. You burp your fondant cakes. What the heck does that mean? What does burping mean? So after you're done with your cake, you place tiny holes around your fondant cake to allow air escape. Because what happens is as your cake settles, air wants to go out. And because you've sealed this cake up so nicely with fondant, it has nowhere else to go. So it will accumulate under the fondant and you have this nice bubble under the fondant, which looks pretty ugly. Especially when you're at a venue and you're staring at it like, what in the world is happening to my cake? So this trick works perfectly. Find, you can use an acupuncture needle dedicated to your cakes. A thin needle so that the holes you place, you will notice them. And you place them in areas where you will notice there is a hole. So I'll usually place them underneath my flowers. I'll place them on top, next to my topper, where you will not notice there is a hole. So I'm going to use a tester. The longer the tool you decide to use, the better, so you can get to the bottom of your cake. Otherwise you can place some holes on top and place some holes at the bottom, on the sides, just to allow air escape. So I have a tester here, that's what I'm going to be using. And I'm going to place some right next to the flower where no one will notice there's a tiny hole. So go where my fondant joins, and I'll place holes right there. Inconspicuous holes. Underneath the core are great places to place them. It just gives your cake a place to burp the air. So that's what burping your fondant cake is. You place holes to allow air escape. I've done this very often and I usually don't have any problems with my fondant cake having blowouts and stuff like that. So around these ruffles, I'm going to place some right around the ruffles. So no one would notice them. Under the flower. There. That's all you need to do. Place burp holes and the rest is history. See you later.